The power cut hit like a thief in the night, plunging the apartment into a void so thick it felt alive. I froze mid-step, a half-eaten slice of pizza dangling from my hand, as the hum of New York City outside our Brooklyn walk-up sputtered into silence. Then I heard Eli's voice, sharp with panic. Call out. Noah. You there? And something in mesothing I'd buried for months lurched awake. I wasn't supposed to feel this way about my roommate. Eli was my best friend. The guy who'd split the last beer with me. Who'd stayed up until 3 a.m. helping me cram for finals. Who'd laughed so hard at my terrible impressions that he'd nearly fallen off the couch. But there, in the pitch black of our tiny living room, with the city holding its breath outside, I reached for him. My hand found his wrist, warm and steady, and a jolt ran through me from the storm. Not from the dark, but from him. It was like touching a live wire. And I knew, right then, that everything was about to change. We'd been roommates for a year, ever since I answered his Craigslist ad with a desperate email and a prayer. I was a broke art student, sketching dreams in a city that chewed up dreamers. Eli was the opposite, a law student with a plan. A guy who wore button-downs like armor and always had an answer. But he wasn't cold. No. Eli was warm, too warm. Sometimes. Like the way he'd look at me when I rambled about my latest painting. His hazel eyes catching mine just a second too long. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was straight. That I was just lonely. That the way my chest tightened around him was just gratitude for a friend who didn't judge me. But lies have a way of unraveling in the dark. Hold on, Eli said, his voice closer now, steadying me as thunder cracked outside. His fingers brushed mine as he fumbled for his phone, the faint glow lighting up his face-sharp jawline. Messy curls, and those eyes that always seemed to see too much. You okay? He asked, and I nodded, though my heart was hammering so loud I was sure he could hear it. The storm had knocked out the power grid. The news later said, a freak blackout across half of Brooklyn. But in that moment, it wasn't the storm that scared me. It was the way I didn't want to let go of his wrist. We found candles in the kitchen drawer, the kind Eli's mom had sent in a care package, and set them up on the coffee table. The apartment flickered to life, shadows dancing across the walls, and we sat on the floor, knees almost touching. Eli laughed, nervous, and said, "This feels like a seance or something." I wanted to laugh back, to keep things light, but my throat was tight. I'd spent months dodging this feeling, convincing myself it was nothing, that I was imagining the way he'd linger when we brushed past each other in the hall. But now, with the world shut off and just the two of us in this fragile bubble of light, I couldn't pretend anymore. Eli, I started, my voice barely above a whisper. What if, but before I could finish, the building shook with another clap of thunder, and he grabbed my hand, his grip firm, like he was anchoring us both. His touch burned, not with pain, but with something deeper, something that made my chest ache. Noah, he said, and the way he said my name soft, urgent felt like a confession. I looked at him, really looked, and saw it, the same fear, the same want, mirrored in his eyes. He wasn't just my roommate anymore. He was the person I'd been falling for, inch by inch, without even realizing it. The blackout stretched on, hours bleeding into each other, but we didn't move. We talked about stupid things at first, like the time we tried to cook a turkey and nearly set off the fire alarm. Then deeper things, Like how Eli's dad had walked out when he was 10. How I'd never felt like I belonged anywhere until I moved in with him. Somewhere in the haze of candlelight and thunder, I told him I'd been scared to admit what I felt. Not just about him, but about myself. Growing up in a small Ohio town, I'd learned to keep my head down, to blend in, to never ask questions about the way my heart raced around certain guys. But Eli made me want to ask those questions. He made me want to be brave. I've been scared too, he admitted, his voice low, like he was afraid the words might break something. He told me about the guy he'd dated in college, how it had ended in heartbreak, how he'd sworn he wouldn't let himself fall again. But then you showed up, he said, his eyes locked on mine, and I couldn't help it. My breath caught. The space between us felt alive, electric, like the air before a storm. I leaned closer, or maybe he did, and suddenly our faces were inches apart, the candlelight painting his skin gold. I wanted to kiss him. I wanted to tell him everything. But fear clawed at me, whispering that this could ruin us, that I could lose the one person who made this city feel like home. The candles burned low, and the storm outside began to quiet. But the tension between us only grew. I don't know who moved first, maybe it was me. Maybe it was him, but suddenly his hand was on my cheek, his thumb brushing my skin, and I was leaning into him. Our lips met, tentative at first, then desperate, like we'd both been holding our breath for months. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a release, a confession, a promise. The world outside could have ended, and I wouldn't have cared. All that mattered was Eli, his warmth, his heartbeat against mine. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. Noah, he whispered, what are we doing? I didn't have an answer, not a clear one, but I knew I didn't want to stop. For the first time in my life, I felt seen not as the struggling artist, not as the kid who never fit in, but as me, flaws and all. Eli saw me, and he wanted me anyway. The power came back on just before dawn, the lights flickering to life with a harsh buzz that startled us both. We laughed, the sound shaky but real, and I realized the blackout had done more than knock out the city's grit. It had torn down the walls I'd built around myself. But as the morning light crept through the window, reality crept in too. What happened now? Could we go back to being just roommates? Did I even want to? Eli stood, stretching, his silhouette sharp against the pale dawn. Coffee? He asked, like it was any other morning. But his smile was different now, softer, more open, like he was waiting for me to decide what came next. I nodded, my heart still racing, and followed him to the kitchen. The city was waking up outside, horns blaring, life resuming its relentless pace. But in our tiny apartment, something new was beginning, something fragile and terrifying and beautiful. We didn't talk about the kiss. Not yet. We made coffee, bumping shoulders in the cramped kitchen, stealing glances like we were both afraid the other might disappear. I didn't know what we were, friends, roommates, something more, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The blackout had forced us to face the truth, and now there was no going back. As I watched Eli pour cream into his mug, his fingers steady despite everything, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. The days after the blackout were a tightrope walk. Eli and I moved around each other carefully, like we were afraid to break whatever had sparked between us. We still ate takeout on the couch, still argued over whose turn it was to do dishes. But every touch, every glance, carried weight. I caught myself watching him when he was reading case law, his brow furrowed, or when he laughed at some dumb meme on his phone. Each moment felt like a brushstroke, painting a picture I hadn't dared imagine before. I threw myself into my art, sketching feverishly, trying to make sense of the chaos in my head. My latest project was a series of cityscapes, all sharp lines and muted colors. But now my drawings were softer, warmer, filled with candlelit shadows and the curve of Eli's smile. My professor noticed, raising an eyebrow at my critique. "This is new for you, Noah," she said. "It's vulnerable. It's honest." I mumbled a thanks, my face burning, because she was right. I was pouring myself onto the canvas, and Eli was in every line. But the world outside our apartment wasn't as forgiving. One night, we went to a bar in Williamsburg, a place we'd been to 100 times. Eli's hand brushed mine under the table, and I didn't pull away. A guy at the next table noticed, his stare cold and deliberate. "Fags," he muttered, loud enough for us to hear. Eli stiffened, his jaw tight, and I felt a surge of anger, but also fear. I'd grown up hearing that word, dodging it like a bullet, and now it hit differently, not just an insult, but a reminder of how the world could punish us for being honest. Eli grabbed my hand, defiant, and held it on top of the table. "Ignore him," he said, his voice steady, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. I wanted to be brave like him, to hold on and not let go. But my heart was pounding. What if this was a mistake? What if we were moving too fast? I'd spent my whole life playing it safe, keeping my feelings locked away. And now I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't control. Back at the apartment, I told Eli about the fear, the doubt, the way I'd been taught to hide who I was. He listened, his hand resting on mine. And when I was done, he leaned in and kissed me again slower this time, like he was promising me it was okay to be scared. "We don't have to figure it all out tonight," he said. "But I'm not going anywhere." His words were a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge. I realized then that love wasn't about being fearless, it was about choosing to show up, even when you were terrified. We started to build something, piece by piece. Late nights talking on the fire escape, sharing secrets we'd never told anyone else. Mornings stealing kisses over coffee, laughing when we burned the toast. It wasn't perfect, there were fights. Moments when my insecurities flared or Eli's past heartbreak made him pull back. But we kept coming back to each other, like magnets, unable to stay apart. One evening, I showed Eli my sketchbook, the one I'd been hiding. It was full of him, his eyes, his hands, the way he looked when he thought no one was watching. He stared at the pages, silent for so long I thought I'd messed up. Then he looked at me, his voice thick. "This is how you see me?" he asked. I nodded, my throat tight, and he pulled me into his arms. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to hide. But the world kept pushing back. My parents called, asking about my art, my life, and I couldn't bring myself to tell them about Eli. Not yet. I heard the guy from the bar in my head, heard the whispers from my hometown, and I wondered if I was strong enough for this. Eli noticed my silence, my hesitation, and one night he asked, point blank, "Are you ashamed of me?" The question hit like a punch. I wasn't ashamed of him, I was ashamed of myself, of the part of me that still cared what other people thought. I told him the truth. Every messy piece of it. And he listened without judgment. "Noah," he said when I was done, "I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be here." His words broke something open in me, and I realized I didn't want to hide anymore, not from him. Not from the world. Not from myself. Spring came to Brooklyn, painting the streets with cherry blossoms and possibility. Eli and I were no longer just roommates, we're partners. Lovers. A team. We'd face the dark, both literally and figuratively, and come out stronger. But life doesn't stop testing you. My art show was coming up, the biggest of my career, and I'd poured everything into it. The centerpiece was a painting of Eli, his face half lit by candlelight, his eyes full of the love I'd been too scared to name. I called it The Lights Went Out, and it was the most honest thing I'd ever created. The night of the show, I was a wreck, pacing the gallery as strangers critiqued my work. Eli was there, steady as always, his hand on my back when the nerves got too loud. My parents showed up, unexpected, and my stomach dropped. I hadn't told them about Eli, hadn't prepared them for the painting that screamed my truth to the world. When they saw it, my mom's eyes widened, and my dad's jaw tightened. I braced for the worst. But then my mom stepped closer, studying the canvas. "This is beautiful, Noah," she said, her voice soft. "Who is he?" I took a breath, glanced at Eli, and told them. Not just about the painting, but about us. About how he'd changed me, how he'd made me brave. My dad was quiet, his face unreadable, but my mom reached for my hand. "I just want you to be happy," she said. It wasn't perfect acceptance, but it was a start. Later, as the gallery emptied, Eli pulled me aside. "You did it," he said, his voice proud, his eyes shining. "You told your truth." I laughed, shaky, and kissed him right there, not caring who saw. The world hadn't chong it, it was still messy, still judgmental, but I had. I'd spent so long hiding, afraid of what it meant to love someone like Eli. But now I knew love wasn't a weakness. It was the strongest thing I'd ever done. We walked home through the Brooklyn night, hand in hand, the city alive around us. The lights were on, but I didn't need them anymore. Eli was my light, and together, we could face anything. The blackout had been the end of one life and the beginning of another one where I was finally free to be me.